Bob and I were colleagues at Humanities Prep Academy, which was a collaborative alternative high school in New York City.
Where in New York?
Chelsea,
Okay.
yeah. And so he was teaching art and using some methods of art therapy. I was teaching math and social studies. So one of the techniques I learned as a high school teacher was to always start on time and to do an activity that basically rewards people for showing up on time but doesn't penalize people who come late, right? So why don't we do this? So why don't we do that? So why don't we do this? If we just, is she coming now?
She's still talking.
Let's just take a minute, just literally like half a minute each, to say who you are and a little bit about your interest in this topic or how you connect to this topic. We'll just go around the room. Okay, so starting with, yes.
I'm Jean Seidel. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I love culture, and I love creative arts, and I work with transgender people. I work with anxiety disorders, and I've worked with brain injury rehab for 30 years. And one of the tools we use in brain injury rehab is art therapy. I'm not an art therapist, but I appreciate it. And so healing the brain through music, art, etc. So there's a lot here for me. And so thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Sure. I'm Blaine Horton. I'm a psychology student. I work with Sheena Iyengar out of Columbia, uptown. I'm helping co-author a chapter on culture for organizational psychology. We're dealing with culture and globalization. So this is kind of relevant. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to check out probably a bit early, but I'm here as long as I can be.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm Guy Lauren. I'm a child psychiatrist in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And to be quite frank, I'm here because I'm giving a presentation after this.
No, excuse me.
Did you get one of these?
Okay, good. All right.
You could have it, you could keep it even though you didn't intend to wind up here. You still qualify.
So we'll keep going around the room.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Connie Benson, and currently, well, I used to teach world religions, and currently I work in a Title I school in Harlem as an educator, where, of course, given the population that I am working with, it's very, I mean, all of these issues are very much relevant to them, that population.
I'm Mary Lord. I'm interested in a lot of words that are in your title here, arts and immigration too. Are you going to talk about that? And this just sounded very interesting. Intergenerational memory. I'm here to be entertained, I guess.
Yeah.
That's us.
So I don't know what the question was, since I
Just
got-
say a word about who you are and how you might connect to this topic. Or some connection you might have to this topic.
Well, I'm Gilda Graff, and I'm vice president of IPA, and where is it?
Not the picture necessarily, but the topic of.
Yeah, well, intergenerational memory is I've written about intergenerational trauma, so I'm really interested in the whole topic, so. And the picture is very interesting.
I'm Michael Britton. I'm a recently retired psychologist. I'm Irish American from the working class, and for a long time needed to not know I was Irish American or working class. And so intergenerational.
When did you find out?
About 5 years ago. About 5 years ago. I'm really slow. You know what I'm saying? So for people being real, I really appreciate the opportunity to be there.
Erin Gobrock, London. Okay, I'm Merle Molofsky. I spent the first 50 years of my life in Brooklyn, and I'm having a lot of fun now with this since then. I am former Director of Education of the Institute for Expressive Analysis, which was founded by Art Robbins. You
Yeah.
must know the name, okay?
2 years.
Oh, yeah.
I spent 2 years of my life there.
All right. And one of my colleagues is Marianne Gunther, who's the head of the New York Art Therapy Association. Okay, so also, a couple of years ago, I did a presentation at the International Forum for Psychoanalytic Education with my grandson Joseph on intergenerational, what gets transmission, what gets passed on. And I'm on the faculty and advisory, board of advisors, faculty. I supervise at Harlem Family Institute. Afterward, if anyone wants to know anything about it, I am happy to tell you about it. It's New York City based. Okay, that's why.
Beautiful. Okay.
Maybe before you go, I could get a business card. And then
Yeah, well, I have yours, but yeah, I will give you mine.
okay.
And you can look up Harlem Family Institute online. We're on Facebook and all kinds of places.
We're just gonna finish it
I
with.
think
Finish it?
we've missed someone.
Okay. Okay, she
Okay,
doesn't, okay, wait,
so
can we just hear
you
from
started
Keisha?
enough trouble
Let's
Can we hear
today.
from Keisha?
I should say something about Lan Ding. I should say something
Okay.
about Lan Ding so there won't be difficulties as soon as this is over. Treading carefully here. Lan Ding is my significant other. She's my significant other, and it's not coincidental or accidental that there is a person that looks strikingly similar to her in this image here. This image is a result of a history of art-making activity that the two of us have shared going back to the 90s. Going back to the 90s. In the 90s, Lan Ding had a unique kind of experience, a unique kind of a situation, as did I. In the 90s, China was just starting to open to the West. So there were some things that happened. There was a little disruptive kind of thing that happened in Beijing, in Tiananmen Square. After that happened, that created the circumstance where many culture people, many artists and culture people could find their way to the West, specifically New York. And Lan Ding was one of the artist culture people who came to the West in the late 80s, 90s.
Beginning of end of 80, beginning of 90.
And she wound up in New York. At that time in New York, I was kind of, I was a curator, and I was a lecturer at the Museum of Modern Art, and I was kind of playing around with a lot of histories and beginning to understand how these histories were actually constructed. When we're educated, we go, and if we're compliant enough, we learn these things that we think are kind of like written in stone. They exist. And if you're a curator, if you want to be a curator for long, or if you want to be a successful curator, you start very rapidly constructing histories. And the longer you do this, the longer you actually believe you have some power to create histories. Lan Ding, because of her background, knew a significant number of the Chinese avant-garde. They were people who today are unquestionably significant, and most of them are, did I say obscenely rich? Most of them are obscenely rich. Through Lan Ding knew them as, I guess it would be mean to say you knew them as little boys, and I kind of met them before they were any of the things that I just recounted about them. Probably the foremost of them is a man called Zheng Xiaogung. Zheng Xiaogung sells his work for several millions of dollars on auction at Sotheby's. That is how this image came about. This image, if you look deeply into it, you'll probably see Grant Wood implicated somewhere up in there. If you keep looking, and depending on your taste and
We can do an activity. Is there an activity?
yes, we're getting to the activity,
But
but
is
just
there something
before,
he wants us to know first?
Well, I thought we were
Yes.
going to do the activity in the eve, but maybe not. Okay.
if you keep looking, you will see Gordon Parks.
Ah.
Gordon Parks is up in there. Yes. Gordon Parks is up in there. And then the version that you probably have in your hands right now, that is actually Lan Ding and I, and it's not real. Actually, it's constructed, it's digital. We invented it, and we put in it what we wanted to put in it, and we left out what we wanted to leave out of it. And some things that we put in reference important Chinese painting.
Ah, and the East is red.
Yes, please.
So the East is red.
Yeah, I just, since Bob mentioned about something about this picture, I sent this photo, which we said it's not real, it's digital film, right? Why we have this photo print out, it's a long history. Since we talk about the intergeneration or long history or culture, immigration, this photo is really come from that. What I'm going to say is, I say everyone knows, like this lady come here right away. She notices Grand Wood. It is. We print out these ones because first they have a famous Chinese contemporary artist. His name is Zhang Xiaogang. He's in the cover of American Art, New York Times, all over place. Till now, Chinese people just consider him a special person to write about him as a whole generation of cultural revolution, whole generation of immigration people, whole generation of educated young people be sent to the countryside, kind of like that. Today we talk about, start from this photo, as everyone knows, the evolution of this photo is from Grand Wood, Gothic, American Gothic. Everyone knows that in art history. And then we have Gordon Parks' photo, American Gothic, Washington, D.C., right? And then because these two photos, Zhang Xiaogang, the Chinese contemporary avant-garde artist, China is completely closed more than 30 years. Every one of us like brainwashed. We know nothing about the Western country. As Bob mentioned, I want to come to Western country. I even through Kissinger the president of my institute said, he visited my institute, he said, okay. I said, can I have a chance to learn something in Western country about contemporary art? So we have no way to come here, so we write a letter to Kissinger, and then the letter is in the ocean, never come back.
Oh.
Because he visited my institute, we'll see how difficult.
We are in
One more
John
thing,
Day
yeah.
sculpture.
So one more thing is talk about, you continue, okay.
So
Can we
just-
take
just to be-
a moment and introduce Keisha?
Yes.
We would like to introduce Keisha. She is invited and has a specific role, as does Brian. As we have implied, I guess, this one image has several layers of history embedded in it and stacked on top of it. Both Brian, because I've known Brian for several years, and Keisha, although I haven't known her as long as I have known Brian, but I strongly suspect that they both have contributions to make in relation to the image and in relation to the discussion. This is American Dream image, but it's an American Dream image that actually got expressed and is still being strongly expressed halfway around the world in China. It is being expressed in China, and it is being expressed to perhaps the detriment of that dream that Grant Woods was trying to project in the 30s and after the Depression.
I wonder if we could just hear who Keisha is, because she didn't really get a chance to introduce herself.
Please.
Oh, please.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Keisha-Thompson. I am a professor of psychology at Kingsborough Community College. It's a part of the CUNY system. And my work is based on race and identity, particularly within Black Caribbean population. So I'll just be contributing after we do the activity.
Right. Okay, so let me just say that the conference is running about a half an hour late, and that means that this panel will go until 4 o'clock. And wait a minute, is that right? No.
It's 2:45 now.
No, it's a quarter. It was, this panel was supposed to go until, sorry, folks,
It's gonna go till
3:50. Is that right? That would be
Yes.
half an hour? Okay. So we go until 3:50. So, Bob, were we going to take like maybe 10 minutes to do the activity now?
Okay, I did suggest to some of you, and not clearly to all of you, that history is made of these different layers, and it's made of invention and exclusion and erasure. I actually, because of something I inherited, I mentioned Gordon Parks. Gordon Parks was a first in a period where many of us were raised to be, you must be first. When your opportunity comes to be first, you must be ready. I was kind of raised like that, and I am first. I'm the first Western person that ever had the opportunity to do public art in the People's Republic of China. That's a history, well, it is documented here and there, but it's fundamentally erased. It's fundamentally erased. Whether it's justifiably erased or not, somebody else other than me would say. When I first showed this to Brian and to Keisha, Keisha immediately noticed something that she felt was, she didn't say dubious, but the tone of her voice led me to believed that she felt it was somewhat dubious. Brian never noticed it. Brian, I don't know if he still notices it. You can take 10 minutes, or it's 10 minutes.
10 minutes. 10
You
minutes.
can take 10 minutes, and you can make that image your own. You can erase, you can replace. Can we go to the second slide?
Yeah.
That little red book slide?
That one?
Yeah, this one.
It sure
This
is.
one is somewhat of a parody of the Little Red Book. There is a Little Red Book. Instead of having Mao on it, it has Barack Obama. It has Barack Obama on there, and it was a big seller in the year that whoever put it together. It sold a lot. There was a humor in it, but it represents a history that we are still acting out and living out. The what is it? The American Care Act.
Oh,
What is
Affordable Care Act?
the Affordable Care Act?
Wait,
This-
the Obama's or the Republican one?
ours or the other one?
What gets called
The good one?
Obamacare.
Affordable Care Act.
Yeah.
What gets called Obamacare. And no matter whether or not you make $16,000 and would wind up paying $24,000 in health costs, you want to get rid of Obamacare. You might not even know what Obamacare is, but there is an intense emotional history that says we are not going to allow this.
The insurance
No
company
matter
said that.
what.
Not
No matter
Obama.
what.
The insurance
So,
company.
can we
said
proceed to the activity, because the clock is
Yeah.
ticking on this, and I'm wondering, do you want people to?
Yes,
You want to give them some silence to work on this, or what?
they can't work if I'm ranting.
Correct.
that. Oh, yeah.
They
yes, you
can't.
can.
I think they
See,
can work in
you
silence.
did-
Yeah, I think there should be
Because
silence,
I
I think there should be 10 minutes of
I think
silence.
it's really important that you try to figure out what message is being conveyed in the image, how you feel about that message, and if you would add to or take anything away from that message.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. Each one would be
Can we
different.
start now?
Yes.
We're starting now. We
Which
have-
one you want to
we have
erase?
10 minutes.
How do
What
we
you want to
erase?
hide?
What erases? It doesn't erase.
Maybe you can cross it out if it doesn't.
Wait, it doesn't erase?
Well, my eraser isn't erasing. what
Can I add one more bit of
No,
information?
no, we need 10 minutes of silence.
No.
now. Okay, please. We really have to give people a chance to present, to do what they're gonna do.
It doesn't erase it?
Yeah, just cross it out. Just cross out anything that you want to get rid of.
It doesn't work.
Or if it gets too frustrating trying to get rid of something that's hard to get rid of, you can just flip the image over and you could write your instructions on the back.
We can't write
And
it
I'll,
here?
huh?
Write it wherever you want.
Can we write it here?
Yes.
Yes.
If you have room, and I will make up a version that conforms to your wishes. And Lan Ding will make up a version that conforms to your wishes. Anyone who would like to share some of what their emotional, psychological process might have been while they were going through that. So please.
I went all political on this one. I mean, I just went crazy mad political and it felt good because I could. So the first thing I wrote was unbraid her hair, loosen her hair. Peasants were pulled around by their braids, I wrote hair, but I wanted to put down braids instead.
Why you want to do that?
I don't want her to be pulled around. I don't want anyone to be pulled around. Where it says drink Coca-Cola, I would want to put in no Coca-Cola, I would erase it, and I would want to put think instead of drink. Think organic food and fresh water.
Did you write down already?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
And I also wrote, her eyes are sad, warm them up. And then I put what the red line that goes from her ear to his mouth, or his mouth to her ear, I put a line from her mouth to his ear.
Yeah.
And that's just,
Can you scroll through what you have?
We were just conferring about how we were going to do our role as so-called conceptual curators, which is what Bob and Lan Ding were talking about. Should we take another 5 minutes to give people, would people like another 5 minutes?
I thought no one said they.
While you were outside,
What do we-
people indicated if they needed more time, and people also indicated if they would like to express their thoughts, feelings,
Right. So,
objections
since I,
while you were outside.
Right.
So I think that we will give anyone who has more that they would like to say about these images the opportunity to share.
And I didn't raise my hand, Brian, he
all right,
called
so
on
I
me.
guess what I'm just asking is that originally we said we were going to give people 10 minutes to work, and that's not written in stone, but I would like to know if anyone wanted more time to work in silence. Is there anyone who would like more time to work in silence? Okay, fine.
I think if you don't mind, just on the lady, I don't know your name, what you
Merle.
said,
Merle.
Laura?
Merle rhymes with girl,
Laura,
yes.
okay. What you said is very interesting. If you can repeat it to
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
Brian
sure.
and
Yeah.
Keisha, let them know
I
what
would
you
be
said
happy
would be
to.
very interesting.
Okay, here's your
No,
pencils.
did you want to,
I wrote,
show?
I unbraid her hair, peasants were pulled around by their braids. No, I would take out the Coca-Cola totally, and instead of drink, I would say think, organic food and fresh water. And I said her eyes are sad, warm them up. And if they're gonna alter the image, I'll hand it in.
Okay.
Brian, can you scroll through what you got up here? And Lan Ding will tell you
So-
when to stop.
I'll scroll and Keisha can maybe elicit, or do you want to?
When I walked in, you talked about,
Where's
you
the
talked about the
iPad.
string going from his mouth
To her
to
ear.
her ear. So,
Oh, I forgot to say that, yeah.
yeah. So I'm wondering, does the direction of the string matter?
Oh, you went past.
Well, if they're going from mouth to ear, there's no change in direction, it's mouth to ear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ear does not talk to mouth, mouth talks to ear.
And so does that say anything about the relationship? Does that say anything about the general message in the image?
They should both be listening to each other. Yes.
Who talked to who, both listen to each other, please.
So so what Merle is saying is in the original image, Bob is talking to you. Your ear cannot communicate to his mouth.
You
Right?
can receive.
You can receive, but you can't give.
Wonderful talking. I want to say a little bit thing, because this is the photo. Why we have the picture about this? We get the idea because Bob curated the show about this Millis painter, right? But when he get the chance to show, he's nothing, no money at all. But now his business, as we said. But this is the photo. He gave the title is Big Family, Big Family Bloodline. So he used the mark on the face. He used the line connected to them. When you mention about how come ear and not connect with mouth, but the line connect that, I think this guy, he want to talk about his whole generation of cultural revolution in China. At that time, everyone's brain was washed. Everyone was saying the same thing, like the first one, Mao Zedong's quotation, a small trail book, right? So we are not allowed to say anything. We are not allowed to do anything. Man is like a woman, woman is like a man. So this is the picture famous because people start to analyze Chinese stuff from psychology point of view already. Say this is the father, this is the daughter, this is the son. They look the same, right?
Yeah.
No impression, because they cover their emotion. No matter how miserable things, shut up, say nothing, be safe, quiet, hide in the bathroom, hide in whatever place. So basically, that's a picture we get this impression, then we come to this one. Wonderwood, Fordham Park, Zhang Xiaogang, then we did this one. So it's like an evolution of the history of the culture of the psychology, that's why. So what you mentioned is very interesting.
And what you said.
Yeah, but the question she asked, what you asked, we discuss. I think maybe from this picture we can see more things, because we are all connected with psychology and history, immigration, you know.
So what I
Nutrition,
heard,
yeah.
so what I heard was that what Merle perceived, what I heard was that you were seeing gender relations in the images, and Lan Ding is interpreting the same thing through a cultural intergenerational lens.
Yes.
Does that sound correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Do we want?
We can go.
Yeah, do we want to get some other ones, maybe?
I really
Yeah.
wanted them to be happy. I just had to put big smiles on both faces. And after I did that, I thought, then Coca-Cola's got to go.
What?
Coca-Cola has to go. Yeah. So I guess they turn out to be organic farmers with smiles on their faces. It pleases me.
Why is the smile so important?
Oh, what a nice question.
Wonderful.
Well,
Well, no, I want her to answer that.
I want
Because
them
she
to be
wants-
happy. When I looked at this, I saw both of you, I knew it was you, and, no. I personally don't want you to be sad. I
Yeah.
want,
So then that brings in the whole idea of culture, right? The way that cultures express themselves. I think if in an American context, if you enter a room without a smile, people automatically say, what's wrong? But for some people, it might be really important that they not enter a room with a smile.
But the eyes.
The
The
eyes.
eyes show more than the mouth.
yeah, you picked up the eyes, not
Yeah.
smiling.
But the statement is, I want them
Yes.
to be happy,
Happy.
right? It's about what you want
Right.
to see. And sometimes I think we tend to
Oh,
push what we want to see versus what people's experiences really are.
bingo. That's terrific. Yeah. And they look with that artwork up there. But if it's generational transmission, it's repression.
Yeah, but how you think, if you think it's
But see, I don't
Yeah.
see it as repression, like I often
What she
talk
just-
about, we've
yeah.
talked about it.
Yeah.
And so what you guys are kind of experiencing is a continuation of a conversation, right? So I've talked about oftentimes, I teach a lot of Asian students. And if I were to go with the way they interact with me non-verbally, I would think that they don't like me and they don't want to be there. Because they don't make a lot will not make eye contact with me. They won't laugh at my jokes. 'Cause quite frankly, they probably don't get it. They're too busy trying to translate, right? But when I would see them in subsequent semesters, when they're no longer in my class, they would greet me in such a warm way, and then I would know. So then I have to make a switch that I can't interpret what they are seeing based on my lens, based on what my understanding, right? I
Yeah.
really have to try to understand culturally what that means. So when we saw the string, right, but that's a whole other thing. But I want to give you guys an opportunity to.
I'm just curious, when you broadened it from Chinese to Asian, so is our discussion broadening?
I'm just
to
giving an
Asian?
example.
Oh,
No, I'm just
okay.
giving an example and that's an
Okay.
example I can use. So sometimes I have Russian students. You understand what I'm just giving an example of sometimes you're interacting with a culture that you're unfamiliar with, and we put what we want to see, right? Particularly as clinicians, it's a line that you have to walk.
Can I say that that is an essential element of Zheng Xiaogong's work? I had the opportunity to go make studio visits to many of the avant-garde and pick out who spoke to me in some kind of way. And I couldn't, oh yeah, that's, that young person without gray hair, that used to be me. And that's in Zheng Xiaogong's studio. And I could not understand what the power of this bloodline series was. Why do Chinese people, specifically mainland Chinese people, respond to this? There's nothing there, no iota of affect, no feeling, no eye warmth, no nothing. And it took me a while, and it took me some time of understanding mainland Chinese history. That was what made it possible for this to be embraced, because there was all of this vast terrain for people to project their feelings, their trauma, their shame, their hurt, their guilt.
Trauma.
It was
Calculated
just trauma, their trauma 2 times. And that was something that I did not connect, I didn't relate to that. It was not within my realm of experience. The smiling thing, what we did was go through his body of work, and we just lifted his vocabulary. Everything is frontal. There should not be a background. Somewhere in there, there has to be a bloodline, a red thread. But if I did the same thing for black people, then I would have to have a big smile. I would have to have a big smile in mine. But because if you're not happy and you black in America, then you're a suspect, and we've got to do something about you.
Guilty of being black.
Yes, yes. For the same reason, late at night, when that blue and red light comes up behind you, you crank up a smile. A benign, you try to make it benign, not sneaky, but you crank up a smile.
I do think this is kind of discussion. We both speak for how you think about it.
Let's hear,
So
let's
yeah,
get some others
Yeah.
input. The thing that struck me was the patch of pale skin on her face, which could be just a riff on skin tone. But it almost looked like it was shining. There was some source of light shining on her, and almost kind of slightly blinding her. So that was a kind of enigmatic part of this to me.
So I wonder what would, and anyone could answer, what would you think that means for putting this in the context of being an immigrant in the United States? Is that patch that you see, is that what remains of her, or is that what she's becoming?
I guess you have to have a part of you that's white that you flash once in a while, just to show that you know where you are, even though most of you is not.
And so it's interesting that we say the term white that has somewhat become synonymous with American, right?
That's right.
Much less so, but yeah.
Yeah, and so there's the onus is always placed on to kind of go back to our keynote, right? The onus is always placed on the victim or on the immigrant to prove something, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when when you come in, you said you are interested because we are going to talk about something about intergeneration, immigration, and from psychology point of view, right? I think sometimes when people don't have the clear idea, then they start to do something that's just jump here and there. But if we have something, we discuss, everyone open their mouths, relax, then the things will come out. The point will get there. Did I express clear? And for one example, like Bob said something, if without his courage, without immigration in this country, I don't think today I will sit here to say anything which I'm talking about.
Yes.
And I will be like Keisha's student. I will choose quiet, silent. Why? Be safe.
Yes.
It's going to be danger.
Yes.
Very dangerous now. So, like he always jokes that if you do something, say something wrong, he push me, say, no, I beg. So after he beg, he said, God will speak out. So I'm very brave, sit here. I said, I'm not going to hide myself, just talk, discuss. Then you mentioned about one thing, the hair,
Yes.
the braid,
Braided.
You
Yes.
want to be looser, right?
Yes. Not because it looks tight,
Yes.
because I know that in China,
Yes.
the serfs, the people, the peasants, the people who worked the
Yeah.
earth, they had one braid in the back and
Yeah.
they were pulled around by their braid.
My goodness,
they
you know
were-
more side story than me. Yeah.
I'm a stranger here, stranger everywhere. I would go home, but honey, I'm a stranger
So,
here. It's
my
an old
po-
song.
My point is like we discuss about intergeneration, psychology, and the trauma. That's what we want to talk through art. And if you want to talk about this,
Oh, can we get some more?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's get some more input from people.
yeah, from people. I'm
Did
sorry,
anybody have,
and always stop me because you know.
were there any people that would like to share what you did with this image? What that you might have added something or erased something? Did you say you had to leave soon?
Yeah, sure.
Did you want
I-
to
sure,
share before?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I actually said that I would remove the red line because it felt like it had some sort of symbolic significance that I couldn't access, and that felt kind of wrong to me to like create a piece of art that has something that I don't have access to. So it felt wrong to express it if it were my version of it. The other thing that I said is that I think the Coca-Cola layer is actually kind of essential to it because it implies this sort of cultural leveling. Right, so one of the things that is sort of particular to the modern era is that we have these global brands that sort of transcend traditional cultures. And Coca-Cola is probably the best example of that. There were advertisements in World War II in Germany that were given with, you know, the Nazi signs for Coca-Cola at the same time that they were being touted as, you know, true Americans. So I felt like that was essential, but I actually kind of wanted to overlay it with some sort of image of, I don't know, something kind of industrial so that the two were sort of fading into each other, just to sort of make that point slightly more salient. This like idea that we live in the same cultural landscapes, that even as things become more urbanized, they become so much more similar, that these tools that we're sharing are the same now. So that was kind of my reaction.
Can I ask you about the access?
Sure.
Being faced with something that you don't have access to becomes very uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that is the exact train of thought that I had. There was a recognition of significance, and I wanted to be both sort of sensitive to the art that already existed and sensitive to what I would express. And it felt wrong. Almost, I mean, you might almost link it up to sort of an idea of like cultural appropriation. The use of symbolism that I don't understand seems somehow inappropriate and uncomfortable.
For you to use it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's really brave to take, and to be accountable for that, right? But then to think about the word access, and we'll again go back to immigrants and immigration and people that maybe have been marginalized or disenfranchised. The whole idea of presenting things that are not accessible. and having an expectation that somehow they'll be able to access it. And if they don't, then it's on them.
Are there any other immigrants in the room?
I'm an immigrant.
Ah, you said from the Caribbean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wanted to follow up on the Coca-Cola thing, because it's interesting how that elicited very different reactions from some
Yeah.
people. And so I guess, and maybe that's the interesting discussion, like, it seemed like a negative, and this, I guess, is an image of globalization, right? So it seemed like a negative image to some people, and but somehow it seemed like a positive image to you. Can you explain more how it seemed positive?
I wouldn't even say positive, I would say just mixed, right? It's this idea of like, on the one hand, there's a real beauty in the idea of like, this has sort of mixed races and mixed cultures coming together, and that's kind of amazing. But on the other hand, it entails this really scary factor that you were discussing earlier of erasure and disappearance. And like those two things are intertwined in sort of a terrifying and beautiful tapestry that we can't pull apart. Which is why like, I don't want to get rid of it, but at the same time I don't want to say that like, it's perfect or beautiful.
well, rum and Coke
Yeah, yeah.
versus American imperialism.
So someone mentioned a little while ago when you asked who was an immigrant, everyone is an immigrant. So maybe we're not all operating with the same definition. So can we?
I think that's very powerful, because I think part of the reason that we have disenfranchisement is because there's some sort of subtext that there are immigrants and non-immigrants.
Yeah.
As though there wasn't, we call First Nations people now, other than Native Americans, but even First Nations people weren't here originally. So by making some claim of immigrant, non-immigrant, we lose the fact that everyone came here and had an acculturation and were disenfranchised. Most people were disenfranchised in some way by some subgroups of people. And we have a lot to talk about all of those disenfranchisements, even if there were some people, for example, with the diaspora we're talking about, which is, a huge war crime, a huge cultural crime, of people being taken against their will versus people coming here willingly. That's, I think, the more important thing rather than immigrant, non-immigrant.
Yeah, I think so. So I think what's happened is that we've moved away from using the term alien, right? And I think I will use the term immigrant to describe myself because I was not born in this country and I went through a process to live here. And so I think that experience is very different from someone who has been here for generations, even if their ancestors were brought here unwillingly, right? So I think while it's very noble to sort of say, hey, we're all in the same boat, I think it might take away from the immigrant experience if everyone were to say, I too am an immigrant. Because just of the process, and when I talk about it, and I think about even going to an immigration naturalization center and the way that you're spoken to, and the lines you have to stand in, and the questions that you're asked repeatedly is something that most other people will never understand. And so I think we cannot share that identity.
But I think it's really important to have these kinds of discussions.
Yes.
Because I think just like someone like me, who's part of my family came over with the Pilgrims to Plymouth, part of my, that's one part of my story, right? But then there's the other part of the story that I grew up in the rural South. I came to the industrial North and got a lot of, we don't do that here. Okay, so I think that all these different kind of discussions are extremely important to tease that out. What is the difference of when you came and into what type of environment you came to? Whether you came from the farm or whether you came, even, I'm in northern New Jersey right now, in one town to the next town. You're an immigrant if you move from this town to this town, not in the way you're talking, but in terms of there are adjustments, and if we are interested in the adjustments that each of us needs to make, and if we are curious about each human being as a human being, this whole the white-black thing has driven me nuts since I was a child about, I see people as having all kinds of skin color. My dad was the country doctor. And when a black man came to the door and he had hot water thrown on him by someone, and my dad said, look at how thin the color line is. And don't ever forget it.
Bravo.
That we are all the same underneath. And yet that was a man that grew up from a slaveholding family.
Yeah.
So we got so many discussions to have with one another.
Merle?
Yeah.
And
Did you
I
have
worry when we bracket things in certain ways.
The gentleman in the back had his hand up for a while.
A couple more things about the Coca-Cola. It's in English, and one of the phenomena these days is that English has become the universal language. And I think it's resented. When we've been to Europe, we've had comments of, you Americans, you expect everybody to speak English. On the other hand, you need a universal language. You can't have every air controller in a different airport speaking a different language. The other thing is it's old, because it seems to be advertising bottles and there's a Simpson in there. So there's this, it's not only, it's sort of a continuity throughout the world. It's not just, a current imposition of our, one of our brands, but it's something that's has been going on so long that everybody knows this, and probably it's fine in China to have a Coca-Cola ad in English because it works just as well.
Can I indicate
Yeah.
that Merle and I, while we were outside, we had a conversation about images and photographs and how one gets from actual photographs to those things that are underneath the photograph. What is up on the screen is an actual photograph. Everything else that you have seen was a fiction. It was a fiction. But this is more a photograph in the sense that, in the journalistic reportage kind of sense that we've become more used to. Zheng Xiaogang is not an immigrant. He never came and lived here, and although he's got enough money to live anywhere he wants in the world, he never lived here. Lan Ding did immigrate here, and many of the things that she's sharing I would have never known about except through this actual photograph and the actual people in the photograph. Many of the David Hammons had an artwork, Whose Ice is Colder, and he had these flags, different cultures, and he draped it over different ice and whatnot. So it's like, okay, you were traumatized by the culture revolution. I was traumatized too. I was traumatized too,
Amen.
As long as I was here, I was traumatized. It took me a while to understand the difference in the nature of the culture revolution and the unending ongoing trauma that some of our citizens experience.
If you want to see about immigration, if you want to say integrate, intergeneration, so this is the typical photo. In this photo, this is my mother, my daughter, my sister.
Oh,
And Bob, when he curated a show in China, and he was invited to do the first Western sculpture invited, right, to build a huge sculpture, which is 6 floors. So he was invited there, but he's a black guy, right? But at that time, very few black people go to China. But at the same time, my point I want to say is, like I was here, I was studying Hunter College. My daughter, I leave her alone. If from psychology point of view, is abandoned. So I have to stay, wait for that green card, how many years? And then when you talk about that, it's very sad. I don't know how about Keisha, did she go through that? But what I said, the intergenerations trauma,
Yes.
psychology, the history is there. And she was very young. I leave her beginning to end, almost 10 years I separate from her. I feel guilty forever.
Yeah.
Now she works in Boston, whatever, other place, and she make much big money than me. She feel empathy, she feel lonely. So this is the history from psychology point of view, from the history point of view, because from her generation, the mother just forget that green card, you come here, then you lose all.
Oh, wow.
So this kind of generation, other people like some Chinese people, son, the father go back, son was here, then the son started commute suicide. And I have
God.
3 people about that. All the son, daughter jump from building, suicide, because girlfriend, love story, all this kind of thing. So when I heard about Keisha talk about all those kind of Asian people, don't talk and no eye contact, whatever, so make me feel very sad. But at the same time, I want to ask a question, is this kind of thing only Asian people have?
No,
Only Russian people have?
No.
Only Jewish people have? I think this is international, global.
and that eye contact thing, I come from Brooklyn, I taught at Medgar Evers College, and I can remember African American children being taught to look down, to try to look people in the eye when they're talking to teachers, look your teacher in the eye. But there was an African tradition of being respectful to your elders by not looking into their face, to show respect by not making eye contact. And that was such a conflict at one point in families that I knew about. The story I wanted to tell, if I could, Bob, do I have time to tell a little story? Okay. And this is going to address, I think, your point too. When my mother told me this story when I was 10 years old, and it shaped my view of life because of how her view of life was shaped when she was 10. She emigrated from Poland with her mother when she was 10 years old. My family is Jewish. So they were Jews living in Poland, and my grandmother was 8 months pregnant, my mother was 10. They were in the 3rd class carriage on their way from Warsaw to Le Havre to catch 3rd class steerage to go to America. And there's the train speeding along, yay! And a group of drunken Polish soldiers got on, young guys, drunk. And they said, oh my God, it smells disgusting in here. It's awful, it stinks in here. I smell Jews. You can smell them, they're here. Let's get them off the train. And they went straight for my grandmother and mother and started to drag this pregnant woman and this 10-year-old girl to the door. My mother said she didn't know, would they really throw them off and would she die? Or would they just stop? She didn't know. The people intervened. They said, boys, 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 shame on you. Don't you have mothers? Don't you have sisters? Leave those poor people alone. And the guys settled down. They got to the German border. The Polish soldiers had to get off or else there'd be an invading army. Guess what happened? A group of drunken German soldiers got on the train. And there was a Polish Christian girl, maybe 18 years old, traveling alone, very demure, very quiet, and they started to harass her, grope her, say very rude things to her, sexual suggestions, and people intervened. And they said, boys, 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 shame on you. Don't you have sisters? What would your mother say if she saw you like that? And the soldiers quieted down, and then women started to comfort the crying girl. And my mother said she learned the most important lesson of her life.
Are you aware that these 2 vignettes that you relayed to us just were acted out a couple of days ago here?
You're where?
Important.
Oh, in Portland. But the 2 women, one with a hijab. But let me give you the punchline, because the punchline is what my mother said she learned at that moment that she would remember for the rest of her life and was teaching me and which I have lived my life by. She said, there is no one ethnic group that is definitively in and of themselves an oppressor or a victim. It has nothing to do with race, religion, ethnicity. Anyone could be anything. You cannot judge, you can't prejudge. And that's what that's my takeaway. And I hope it's your takeaway.
Beautiful, thank you.
Oh, I know you want me to shut up half the time, but thank you.
That was my smooth
Yes.
way of saying.
Shut up.
I think, so
Brian,
No, so
Brian,
I wanted to.
what time do
I wanted,
you
you know,
want?
we actually, we have about another 15 minutes.
Okay.
So, but I did want to be sure that Michael and Gilda and Connie had a chance to share what they were thinking or wrote. If you want to.
Something that struck me for whatever was the pitchfork. And I realized the pitchfork had to have been digitally pasted in or something, but the ironness of it, the old ironness of it, just really,
The irons.
yeah, of the pitchfork. You know, this is not
You're
something.
perceptive, it is iron.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't come
and
from
it
Home
is-
Depot
It
last
is
week.
Photoshop.
And so, what it really struck me as was prison bars was what came to mind. And so I drew up the forks of it and made bars.
Huh.
And what really was, I don't understand it at all, but before I did that, your face seemed more recessive. It was hard to bring it into focus. Once I put these things on the bars there, it was like you came forward, you came right into focus. It was like you were right there in a way that you weren't until I did that. And it's not...
That's not terribly encouraging.
Well, it's strange, right? It's strange. I mean, it's acknowledging a reality of the role of prisons these
Yes.
days, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I don't know. It's almost
Can I-
like without acknowledging that, it's
Can
like,
I,
what the hell?
can
Yeah,
I quote
please.
you
Yeah.
in this?
Well, yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. Meaning?
Meaning the next time we have some version of this conversation, I would like to invoke your observations and your activity. It does seem to happen, and you figured out a way of not erasing me, but getting me more present in the image. I don't know if I enjoy.
It took a lot of really disturbing reading and looking at a lot of stuff to find out about the prison industrial stuff in this country and all of that. It was like different from what I was grown up being told America is. And it's like, it took a while for the prison stuff to become visible, to not be an erased thing altogether. And somehow, like, acknowledging it, I don't know, it's a funny thing. Somehow, it's not like you become more present because there's prisons. It's like without acknowledging prisons, a lot of people are less, the reality of their lives is a whole lot less present. That's been my experience. I knew a whole lot less about people until I found out a whole lot more about police and prisons. So,
And now when you see things, it's through that lens. And
Yeah.
you're seeing things in places before that you didn't see before.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. See the whole country differently.
Yeah, yeah.
The whole country different.
I also focused on the pitchfork, but in a very different, given a very different interpretation of it. I left it as a pitchfork, and to me, it's a sign of strength, because traditionally, African Americans were not allowed to hold weapons. Brian and I had this conversation recently about, the Second Amendment and people defending the Second Amendment. Interesting, everyone can carry a gun, whatever, except people of color. And oh my goodness, as soon as they've got something that looks like a weapon, and this looks like a
12-year-old
weapon.
children.
I mean, you could really do damage on somebody with this pitchfork. And there's the image of the devil's pitchfork traditionally in Americana. And so, to me, it's like the man of color here is seizing something that is normally not allowed him. And in the famous painting, of course, it's the landowner who holds that pitchfork, who's standing his ground with that pitchfork with his wife by his side. And he's no field slave, he's the owner, okay? And so he's holding that pitchfork in front of his house and his land. And so for Bob here, I'm assuming this is you making the connection. For you to be having that pitchfork, it's kind of, you're staking out your property. You're a landowner now, and you're actually out in the country with that piece of property, which again was verboten, not allowed. So this is breaking through those old boundaries, in my opinion. And in terms of not smiling, I'm from the generation of Angela Davis and Black Panthers, and I was a great admirer of Angela Davis. I never saw that woman smiling pretty much in her posters. And I mean, that was when you were like looking right in the eye and you had your game face on. You weren't just out to make nice with anybody. So, I mean, I just see that strength here. And the Mao hats, that's what I'm seeing. Again, I think of the 60s revolution era and that whole zeitgeist kind of conveyed here. I think of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which is, the 50th anniversary this year, with the uniforms, and it just evokes the 60s.
Well, if you're back in
so
the 60s,
I've got all this going on here.
just remember the revolution will not be televised.
But it
Bill
is.
Scott
Yes,
said.
yes.
Yeah, but it'll be on Facebook and Instagram.
That's right.
So I'm wondering, you've gotten a little bit more background about these people here, or at least this representation of them. Is there anything from your original assessment or from your original design that you would like to rethink?
Well, for me, after hearing that and realizing that, yeah, it's like standing, now I look at your faces and it's like, yeah, I can see that. It's like standing your ground. There's a lot of strength in both faces.
Black guy standing his ground.
So it
Well,
really,
both people. Both
And it's-
people.
That's right.
it's interesting that we're using that term "standing your ground,"
Yes.
right? We all know
Yeah.
about that Florida law, right?
Oh,
That
please.
it works for some folks and not for others. So
Mhm.
at the same time that George Zimmerman was invoking his right to stand his ground, Melissa Alexander was being prosecuted for standing her ground,
That's
right?
right.
So the whole notion of standing your ground for a person of color, what does that mean?
Right. Do I hear a witness? Talk about a witness.
Gilda, you've really thought a lot about this and written about it. Do you have any thoughts?
I don't know. My medium is words, and it's very hard for me to, like saying that I should change something. It's that I don't know what to do. It's kind of curious. It's always, I was gonna say it's always been words, but actually when I was a kid, I used to write. I wrote stories, and then I stopped, and I did not write again. I mean, of course, I wrote papers to school and everything, but I did not write anything other than that for like 50 years. So
And now?
Words.
And now
And now I'm still writing. Yeah.
you're telling your story.
And now I'm telling my story.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And there's something about immigrants. my grandparents came to this country and never talked about anything. I mean, I know nothing about their experience as immigrants or their experience in Russia. They came from Russia. So hearing about it, whatever, gives me some sort of feeling for what they might have gone through.
Why he didn't say anything?
Why
Your
didn't they say-
grandfather don't say anything, don't mention anything, right? Why?
Well, it's so much about trauma. I mean, I don't know. They never told us. but-
Protect this
Yeah.
generation,
Yes.
but the trauma seeps in
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
Can I ask the keynote speaker the question that I didn't get a chance to ask her? You talked about children and internalizing the not good enough. You're not good enough. Based on white culture denigrations. And you also described clinically someone who had really idealized the person's parents. And I wonder if a child feels denigrated because the child is black, how does that child perceive the parents as good enough? Or are the parents also, generation after generation after generation, reduced to not good enough? And how does that manifest in a transference with an African American therapist? Too complicated?
Too many.
Pick and choose.
Well, I think African American parents have the same power that other parents do vis-a-vis their children. But there certainly is knowledge that they are not as powerful in the wider culture on the part of the children. But I don't know that changes how the child relates.
What protects the child
Protects the child.
from denigrating the parent if the parent is the same denigrated color the child is? How does the child
It's probably only later in childhood that the child becomes aware of the social differences between races, right?
Yeah, but
So-
even
Yeah.
then, my father and mother could do things to me that nobody else could, and had meaning for me that no one else ever did. But yes, it would be just.
Well, to this specifically to you, said your father, mother do something for you. Other people cannot do. What's that?
Hurt me in ways that others can't because no one is as important as they.
Yes.
Make me feel, there was an example, my father saying that I had no, what on earth are you talking about? You wanted something. So you can't think of anything less important than your desire. And that had to do with what had been done to his desire. And it was so meaningful to me that it changed my sense of having the right to desire. He must be right with all the things that he never got.
And I think it goes beyond childhood. Interestingly enough, I had a conversation with my students this week. Most of my students are either first generation immigrants or their parents are immigrants. And so they made the comment to me like, you guys make life look so hard, talking about adults. Like you guys don't have fun. Tell us about all this stuff that you've been through. And we don't really care. It doesn't apply to us, right?
Yeah.
And so there is a generation now, I think, of immigrant parents that tell their children what they've experienced, the sacrifices that they've made in order for them to get some. And it goes back to, well, you're asking me for frivolous things, right? And so they're like, what you're asking for doesn't amount to the sacrifice that I've made or that I'm making for you, right? But if you go back a previous generation or two to immigrants, it was just really important that they blended into the society, and you had people changing their names, you had people changing their hair. It was just really important, and I think one of the blessings about the atrocious time that we live in is that people are resisting, and part of their resistance is their identity. We have a group of students on campus that they call themselves undocumented and unafraid because they refuse to hide, right? So a lot is happening in terms of the immigrant identity, and is it something it went from trying to hide that you're an immigrant and that you can blend in to like, hey, I'm different and I'm okay with that. And that's why it's going to be on Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because
The revolution.
because
It
young
is.
people are showing themselves.
If you get a chance to come to my presentation tomorrow, it's about it's about a single voice and the power of a single voice. What gets posted on Instagram, and it's political poetry and photographs. So yes, that power is there.
So I think this is a good place to wrap this up. I want to say that Dr. Guy Lord, who's right in the back of the room here, is going to be presenting in 5 minutes in this room on the evolution of diagnoses relating to sexuality in the DSM series, from object choice to identity.
It's more interesting than it sounds.
You want to just say a word, just say a word about what you're going to be talking about? Or?
Well, it gives a little history of the DSM series and some of the politics and cultural issues behind that. And it starts with a diagnosis that, say, homosexuality is in the same category as race. And so that the person's labeled with that kind of diagnosis, agitated to get the diagnosis removed. And so it was removed based on activism in the early gay movement. But the evolution has been much more towards sexual identity and gender dysphoric issues, and there's been a quite different attitude towards diagnoses, because these days they're seen as opening up treatment and services. And I think that there's a fascination with gender and gender fluidity and the ability to pick your gender and non-binary gender. So I hope to make it entertaining.
Okay, good.
What you just did is solved my dilemma. There were 2 other presentations by people who I know and feel concerned about, and I was trying to decide which of those 2 I had to go to, and now I know where I'm going to be.
Okay. You're going to stay here?
Yeah.
Good. All right. So thank you, Bob and Lan Ding.
Well, I would like to thank you all for your time, attention, patient attention, your contributions, and if you actually did leave some instructions that you want to see realized, leave your photos.
Because I bet you're going to use them in other situations, and so it's a pleasure to be part of that process.
If you leave your business card, I'm going to call you, because we have a broken conversation.
Yes.
The constructed images and the real images interact in ways